Hi, Sarah. Okay, so we are actually up to chapter 16. Amazing that we've come this far. So beautiful. And chapter 16 is not going to let anybody off the hook. The Alter Rebbe brings down very practically in chapter 16 a very practical way of serving Hashem, no excuses. Now, in the last chapter, in chapter 15, we discussed the concept of the Beinoni, or in our cases, the potential Beinoni, if he's considered to be serving Hashem actively or not serving Hashem actively, right? And someone who is basically he could be learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs, but he is relying on the hidden love for Hashem, which every Jew possesses as an inheritance from Avraham Avinu. He is relying on that love. He is not awakening that love. He is not producing a love as a result of his intellect. A Beinoni who is simply coasting along and relying on that hidden love is definitely fulfilling Torah mitzvahs, but he is not considered to be serving Hashem. Because love and fear of Hashem are important components, active love and fear are important components in the service of Hashem. But here's the thing. We tend to think that our love and fear of God have to be perfect. And many times the Yetzer Hara has a field day with us and says, well, you don't really love Hashem all that much. And actually, even if you do, it's not really such a great love. It's like a little bit of fear of God, So we could start feeling like a little bit hypocritical, fulfilling Torah mitzvahs, if our love is not, this fiery love, and our fear is not a complete love. But love and fear, and we will discuss how to deal with it in a minute, because that's what this chapter is all about. But love and fear of Hashem are important components of a mitzvah, because firstly, love of Hashem motivates a person to do a mitzvah, right? That's the motivation behind the mitzvah. And fear of Hashem, fear of God, motivates a person to avoid sin. Now, I just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer here about the concept of fear of God. Later on in Tanya, and especially in chapter 41, which is a very fundamental chapter related to the fear of God and accepting upon oneself the yoke of heaven, but just to give a little bit of a perspective on the way Tanya looks at fear of Hashem and why it's important, there are different kinds of fear of Hashem. The most basic is fear of punishment. Like, a little kid won't do something because he's scared he's going to be punished. That's a very rudimentary fear. It's a very low level fear of Hashem. It's basically you're fearing the consequences, and so it's kind of a selfish fear. You're fearing what's going to happen to you, right? There is a different kind of a fear that Tanya talks about later, but I'm just going to mention it briefly here, just because this chapter, explains the importance of having love and fear as ingredients to fulfilling mitzvahs. The kind of fear that the Alter Rebbe refers to is, first of all, there's a kind of fear called yiras boishes, and a fear of embarrassing oneself before God. In other words, you hold Hashem in such awe and such reverence that you wouldn't want to do anything opposing his will, because you would be dead embarrassed, right? So you don't want to be embarrassed for Hashem. There's also a different kind of a fear which stems from love. There is a fear of God which stems from wanting to feel connected to Hashem. And so therefore the counterpart for that, the fear, is to fear separating from Hashem. So I'm just trying to introduce you to the concept that fear of God is not black and white. There's a lot of details which are going to come later on in Tanya, but for now it's just important to know that fear of Hashem is not just, oh, I'm scared of Hashem or I'm fearing punishment, but there could be other layers to this fear as well. But it's very important. It's a very important ingredient for avoiding sin, because if you don't have that fear, that reverence, one doesn't necessarily, that's the ingredients to avoid sin, and love is the ingredients of a mitzvah which actually causes someone to be motivated to fulfill those mitzvahs. And these, as we said in the beginning of this class, this love and this fear have to be active, because if a person is simply relying on the hidden love, which we're getting closer to discussing the hidden love, which is in chapter 18, quite a fundamental chapter of Tanya as well, then he is not actually considered actively to be serving Hashem. He's just coasting along. Now, for a Beinoni, actually, you don't need, here's the thing. People think that in order to serve Hashem, you have to strive for perfection. And here the Alter Rebbe comes along and says, perfection is not the goal. Because if perfection were the goal, if you needed a perfect love to serve Hashem, we wouldn't need to have Beinonis and potential Beinonis. It would just be enough to have a tzaddik. A tzaddik has a perfect love for Hashem. And if that were the goal, well, then Hashem could have made everybody tzaddikim. The goal is the struggle. We touched upon this last chapter, but this chapter goes even further. The goal is the effort and the struggle which a person puts in, a potential Beinoni, in overcoming the animal soul to do the will of his godly soul. In other words, to do the will of Hashem. That is the struggle. That is the goal. And therefore, the love doesn't have to be perfect. And we're going to explain in a minute why not. But before we explain why it doesn't have to be perfect, let's explain why it is actually a little bit important, a lot important as well. Because when a person, let's just say, for example, a person avoids doing something, but it's not out of the fear of Hashem, right? It's not because you fear Hashem. You just have a really strong willpower and you're going to avoid doing sins or whatever activity is not in alignment with the will of Hashem, and you're servicing Hashem. If you don't fear Hashem, then with time, your enthusiasm for avoidance wanes, becomes less and less. In the beginning, we're very excited, we're very motivated, but after time, that becomes less complete. And the same thing with the love of Hashem. If you're doing mitzvahs not out of love of Hashem, you're just using your willpower. That's why we learn from Tanya, actually, that willpower is very overrated. Willpower is very overrated. It doesn't last. You have to have love and fear of Hashem in order for your fulfillment of the mitzvahs to endure and for your avoidance of sin, your enthusiasm for avoidance of sin to last as well. And in order to do that, you have to develop a love and fear of Hashem. The same thing with love. If you're doing mitzvahs not out of love, your enthusiasm will wane over time. Your actions will become dry. But if you have love of Hashem, then they won't be dry. So again, comes the question. So then what if we don't have this perfect love of Hashem, right? To further complicate matters, the Zohar explains to us that love and fear of Hashem are considered to be the wings of your mitzvahs. When a person does a mitzvah, the kavanah of doing a mitzvah, the point of doing a mitzvah, is to fulfill Hashem's will. So if you do a mitzvah without love and fear of Hashem, you did your mitzvah, it's precious to Hashem, but your mitzvah does not rise to levels, to spiritual worlds where it should rise to. So depending on the level of your kavanah, it has to rise to the world of Bria, Yetzirah. That's not important. That's not the importance. But what the bottom line is that the Zohar tells us is that the mitzvah needs to have the wings, just like a bird needs two wings to fly, our mitzvahs need two wings to fly. Love of Hashem and fear of Hashem. So the Yetzer Hara can have a field day with us, an absolute field day with us. The Yetzer Hara can say, you haven't really done the work, Your mitzvah, what's the point of doing a mitzvah? Your mitzvah is not going to go where it has to go, or your mitzvah is not, you don't have a full-fledged love. And okay, you're working on it, but you haven't really gotten there. Does that resonate with everybody? It's a little bit, you're such a hypocrite. You should really, you think you're doing a mitzvah, but you're just doing it out of rote. You're just doing it automatically. You don't really love or fear God, which, by the way, most of the time, we're not consciously thinking about the love of Hashem or the fear of Hashem when we do mitzvahs or avoid sin, right? But here, And we could feel bad about that. We could feel, wow, you know, why don't I have love of Hashem? Why don't I fear Hashem? And are my mitzvahs worth anything? So how actually is love of Hashem achieved? Love of Hashem is achieved by contemplating God's greatness. Where if it's through learning Tanya or studying other texts of the Torah, it's by contemplating how great God is. And the interesting thing is that Tanya gives us this concept. The Alter Rebbe teaches us this concept, which we're going to learn in this chapter, before he introduces us to many, many ways of developing a love of Hashem. Tanya does not leave us hanging. The Alter Rebbe teaches us in the coming chapters many different techniques of developing a love of Hashem. If you remember this that Hashem did, if you remember, for example, we're coming up to Pesach, if you contemplate about the fact that Hashem from his lofty place went down to such a lowly place and took you out of Mitzrayim, you will, etc., etc. Those are in upcoming chapters. But here, this chapter is saying, don't worry if you don't get there completely, because yes, love of Hashem is produced by contemplating God's greatness. But what if you have a limit to your intellectual capacity? What if someone is smarter than somebody else? What if another person can develop a greater love because he has a greater intellect? Or what if the root of your neshama comes from a different place from someone else? We can't control where our neshama comes from. And the truth is that there are different places where different neshamas come from, different levels, let's say different capacities that they have for spiritual enlightenment, let's call it that. And what if yours is limited? And what if someone's smarter than somebody else? So everybody has different limits, different levels. So how can we say that if your love of Hashem is not complete, could it be that you're not serving God completely? Because then you need to be a tzaddik, right? So then the Alter Rebbe explains to us, introduces us actually to a concept in this chapter, which is not a full-fledged emotion. It's not love of Hashem or fear of Hashem, but it's something called a tevuna. And I will explain to you what it is, because interestingly, even in the English translation of Tanya, the word tevuna is not translated, but I will tell you what I believe is to be the closest translation to this word. What is a tevuna? A tevuna is an intellectual emotion. What is an intellectual emotion? Now let's separate the two. Intellect is intellect and emotions is emotions, usually, right? So intellect, you have your brain works to understand concepts and to chew them over and to internalize them and absorb them. Emotions you feel in your heart, right? Emotions you feel in your heart. So what's an intellectual emotion? It's an intellectual feeling. What is that? The closest word that I believe explains what it is a conviction. A conviction is when you think that something is very, very important. A conviction is you really think you have a conviction that something is important to do, and therefore you do it. In other words, a conviction changes behavior. A conviction is strong enough to change habits. Possibly it is not an emotion, a full-fledged emotion, but it is an intellectual understanding that something is important to do. And that is what a tevuna is. In other words, even if you do not have the intellectual capacity to understand godliness and to therefore create a fiery, full-fledged love of Hashem. What is this fiery, full-fledged love of Hashem? A tzaddik who has this very ardent love of Hashem feels like he wants to expire out of his body. He doesn't want to stay here. He loves Hashem so much that he wants to connect with his source and expire from his body. In actual fact, the sons of Aaron, that was their mistake, Dathan and Aviram. That's why they didn't obey instructions. They went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and they were punished by death, but not because they were bad people. They meant well. They just simply thought that the best way to serve God was by expiring. Let's just go out of our bodies. Now we know, and Tanya will explain time and time again, that the objective. The will of Hashem is for us to stay in our bodies and to make this world a dwelling place for Hashem, a place where Hashem feels comfortable, a place where godliness is revealed in every single corner. But a tzaddik wants to expire out of his body. His love is that complete. He feels that his body is just, an obstacle, and he wants to just connect with his source. He doesn't want to worry about the mundane world, right? But even if you don't feel such a love, right, which is what would be considered to be a complete love, you can still serve Hashem properly by arriving at a conviction of the heart, which changes behavior, motivates your behavior, and takes you beyond your natural habits. In other words, a person who has a full-fledged emotion, right, feels like he wants to expire. A person who has a conviction or a tevuna feels like he should feel like that. In other words, he hasn't arrived, but he feels that it's a really important thing to strive for. It's an important goal to get to. He thinks it's important to love Hashem with a complete love, and therefore this conviction is so strong that it translates to action. It becomes action, which are basically the fulfillment of mitzvahs, and therefore, even though it's not a full-fledged emotion of love and fear, it also serves as the wings of a mitzvah. The same way as the heart in your physical body, your heart gives vitality and energy to the other organs of your body. For example, if you love somebody or you love something, you can feel it in your body. Your hands start trembling, and it actually translates to your body, right? In the same way, the love of Hashem, which is in your heart, gives vitality to your fulfillment of mitzvahs, right? So one can think that you need this full-fledged emotion. And here the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us something really beautiful. The Alter Rebbe is telling us you don't actually need to. Don't fall into the trap of the Yetzer Hara to think that you need to achieve perfection, this perfect love. It's enough to have a tevuna, which is an intellectual feeling, a conviction, if you cannot develop anything beyond that. But we have to understand how this can be. Somebody's asking if a conviction is a commitment. Well, it contributes to commitment, yes, but it causes the commitment to change, and we will understand why. The reason is that a tevuna can serve, which is not a full-fledged emotion of love and fear of Hashem. It is a conviction in your heart that a full-fledged love and fear of Hashem is important. Why can it serve as the wings of a mitzvah? Through the help of Hashem. In other words, this is a beautiful concept, because when we start serving Hashem and we try our best, Hashem helps us. But how does Hashem help us? This is a very interesting concept. The Alter Rebbe cites the verse in the Talmud, in the Gemara, which tells us, Machshava toiva HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfe l'maisa. A good thought, Hashem joins a good thought to the deed. Now, normally we explain this verse the following. Let's say a person wants to really fulfill a certain commandment, wants to really fulfill a certain mitzvah. However, lots of obstacles stand in his way, and the end result is that he does not end up fulfilling the mitzvah. Despite his best efforts, for some reason, the mitzvah does not get fulfilled. So to comfort him, the Gemara tells us that don't worry, Hashem considers your thought as if you did the deed. So like as if you would have actually done the mitzvah, you put in your best effort, and nonetheless you weren't able to fulfill the mitzvah, Hashem considers it as if you did it. But the Alter Rebbe points out that this verse, this pasuk, this in Gemara is interesting because it uses an interesting terminology of the word joins. Hashem joins the thought to the deed. What does that mean? Why can't we just say that Hashem considers the thought as the deed? Why does Hashem join the thought to the deed? So this is where the concept of tevuna comes in, as per the Alter Rebbe's explanation. Conviction, a conviction to do something, is different to emotion. you want to, in other words, we need to be motivated to do a mitzvah, yes, and the love of Hashem motivates us. But what animates the mitzvah, what gives life to the mitzvah, is the love and the fear. It animates the mitzvah to such an extent that it makes the mitzvah rise up to the heavenly spheres, right? So conviction usually is different to emotion. It shouldn't really vitalize the mitzvah in the same way as the heart vitalizes the organs, one would think, right? Because intellect is abstract, whereas emotion is more, feeling, and intellect is usually like more removed from action, correct? But what does Hashem do? Hashem helps you out. Hashem joins the intention, the conviction with the act, and you're given credit. In other words, notwithstanding the fact that your emotions are not complete, because of the fact that you think it's important to have complete emotions, and you're striving towards that, you're struggling to overcome your animal soul, Hashem joins that to your emotions and gives it wings, gives the mitzvah wings. So it's not that the thought is rewarded instead of the action, right? Which would be in the case where a person tries to do the mitzvah and lots of obstacles stand in his way, right? It's when this thought motivates the mitzvah that Hashem in turn animates the mitzvah. Okay, so in other words, this conviction, how do you know if this conviction is enough? You know if it's enough if it causes a change in behavior. It's not just like a fleeting thought. It's a reflection. It's contemplation. It's like you're contemplating on the greatness of Hashem. You're contemplating on how important it is to love Hashem. You're just not there yet. But this conviction is enough that you are able to change your behavior. You're able to change your habits. When Hashem sees that, he says, okay, it's not only, it's you're motivated to the mitzvah. Now I'm going to help you up and animate the mitzvah. Give it wings, give it vitality to rise to wherever it needs to rise. And it's all because of the struggle. So if you don't have a full-fledged emotion, do the mitzvah anyways. Don't wait. You don't have to say, oh, but I need this love and fear of Hashem to fulfill my mitzvah. That is the Yetzer Hara coming in a disguise to you and saying, you really need to be holy in order to do a mitzvah. You need to really love Hashem to do a mitzvah. No, you have to contemplate on the fact and think it's important enough to love Hashem, and it has to motivate your behavior and motivate change. But do it anyways because Hashem helps out. So to conclude, Tevuna is actually the real meaning of what we call the wisdom of the heart. And I want to just make a distinction over here, because if you go many times, I've heard people say, listen to your heart. What is your heart telling you to do? And actually, according to Torah, that is incorrect. One should not listen to your heart. You should listen to your intellect. You should ask your higher self, your nefesh elokis, your godly soul, what does Hashem want, and produce the emotions that are in the heart. So when people say, oh, what is your heart telling you? That is incorrect. But what is really the wisdom of the heart? A wisdom that starts off in the intellect, but doesn't become fully fledged in the heart. It remains as a conviction. In other words, an intelligent feeling. And yes, serves as the wisdom of the heart because it motivates you to change your behavior and serve Hashem. Okay, how's that? Any questions?
Hannah?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what to say, but anyway, not about, okay, so you just said, that was too much. If you say, listen to your heart and see what you must do, you shouldn't do that, right? You said that's not where it's supposed to come from.
Well, let me just stop you there for a minute, Sina. If you're angry at somebody, right, and you act upon that anger, were you listening to your heart?
Well, I wasn't thinking about it intellectually, was I?
Right. You were listening to your hearts, right? If a person uses the intellect, like we've said this many times before, if a person uses his intellect to justify the emotions of your heart, you're listening to your heart. I'm just using the expression. I'm not saying that, like, but like people say, like, oh, what's your heart telling you? No, what's your brain telling you is Yiddishkeit.
Right. So it's listen to your head, to your
But
intellect.
yeah, but your intellect of your godly soul. That's the differentiation. That makes sense?
Yep.
So I went to look up the definition of conviction and it said that it's a firm belief or opinion. So now I kind of like
It is.
understanding more. Okay, I didn't know what.
Because
I mean,
a conviction is a firm belief, meaning there is emotion involved. When someone has a strong opinion, let's say two people are arguing and someone wants to really make their opinion heard, they develop that opinion through their intellect, hopefully, right? They thought it through, they're debating the benefits of a certain thing or whatever, right? But they believe it firmly, which means that it is coupled with emotion.
Got it. So we start with, let's say, having a feeling. We need to bring that feeling to our intellect, and
No,
that's
opposite.
No?
Start of having a.
That's what I'm trying to. Okay.
So
explain.
it's opposite. How it's because it's not the hidden natural love that every Yid has. Every Jew has a hidden natural love, which is, by the way, that's the love that causes a person never to negate the existence of God, no matter how far he is, right? Because when it comes to a matter of life and death, it's really important, and all of a sudden that love awakens. But it's very important to love Hashem. But how does that love become complete? Starting with our intellect. You generate a love from Hashem through contemplating on God's greatness. How do you contemplate Hashem's greatness? Through studying, through using your intellect, right? But let's say you're studying and you're using your intellect, and just your love that you're trying to produce is not becoming what you want it to become, is not becoming full-fledged. You're feeling frustrated. Well, that frustration could come from the Yetzer Hara because, oh, you're not doing a good job. Your intellect isn't producing enough love of Hashem over here. So the Alter Rebbe comes along and says, no. As long as you're feeling it strongly that you should have a love of Hashem, that is enough because Hashem joins it to the.
Got it. So you have like a firm belief that you believe in Hashem.
You have a firm belief that not only that you believe in Hashem, that's a different thing, that's emunah, but you have a firm belief of Hashem. You have a firm belief that love of Hashem is important. You may not be there yet, but you have a conviction that it's important to strive for.
Okay. And that's where you work things. That's where it all stems from.
Right.
And that's
exactly.
where
hopefully over time you'll develop a greater love, and with the techniques of Tanya you'll contemplate more and you'll develop a greater love, but never use it to say, oh well, I didn't achieve anything over here, so therefore my mitzvahs don't have wings. On the contrary, they do.
Okay, so everything stems from our intellect, and eventually we create an emotion and a love and a fear of Hashem because of our intellect.
Well, tavuna, this conviction already does have some emotion. It's just not full-fledged. It's like the Alter Rebbe says, it's in the recesses of the heart. It's not in the revealed part of the heart. Because when you feel strongly about something, it is an emotion. Okay, I think right.
The more you're able to develop it.
Correct.
Okay. This is different than, let's say, something came up in your life that's making you upset and you want to tap into your higher self.
No, that's different. That's like something, yeah, that's like that, but that is the struggle because I'm getting to Shalamis. I see that her hand is holding up, but it's a good question, Mindy, because the more and more we strive to develop a love for Hashem, the easier it will be for us when we are confronted with challenges like our emotions coming up from the heart. That's the whole point. The more and more we develop a love for Hashem, the more we study about Hashem, the more we study Tanya, the more tools we will have that at the moment of anger, jealousy, pride that is coming from the left side of our heart, the animal soul, we will have the tools to combat that, to overcome it, and to calm it down and say, okay, let's see what my godly soul is saying right now, right? It's not all these things are not linear. They're all like, convoluted together.
But that's what Alter Rebbe says, that if you want to have like good machshavos, keep learning, right? And then in the morning we
100%.
tap into davening. Davening is the Vaidav Shabbaleh because it gives us that like fuel for the day, that when
Correct.
things come up, we're already starting from our like tapping into the Abishter, and we're able to have that connection to be able to affect all the things that come up throughout
Correct.
the day.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Shalamis wanted to ask a question, but I don't know if she went off. So anyone else?
Hannah?
Yes.
Okay. So when you said, and I didn't know how to finish the sentence, you said, but if your love doesn't become full-fledged, your Yetzirah comes in to make you doubt that if it's enough, is the end of that. But if we continue to struggle more and more to develop a love of Hashem, the more tools we have and all the emotions that come from the animal soul to combat the Yetzirah, then we'll be able to overcome that.
Well, yes, what you said is true. What you said is true, but not necessarily it's the ending. In other words, if the Yetzer Hara comes to you and says, oh, you don't have enough of a love of Hashem, you haven't worked hard enough, or you haven't developed this love and it's not complete enough. So who are you? What do you think? Your mitzvahs are gonna, rise to Hashem. They're not worth anything, blah, blah, blah. The Yetzer Hara can have a field day, really. You have to remember that if you feel strongly that a love of Hashem is important, that's called a conviction of the heart, a tevuna, and that is enough. Don't think that it's not enough. Here, the Alter Rebbe comes along and says to us, yes, I'm going to give you plenty of techniques to develop a stronger love of Hashem, but if you don't get there, and if you simply have a conviction that it's important, worthy to strive for that, and you're struggling towards that, that is enough. I will join your thoughts to the action. I will give your action wings. Does that make sense, Sina? Mindy, you wanted to say something?
I was gonna say it's like the statement in Tanya, Halavai Beinani, like that's our conviction, like that we should.
Well, that's who we all are. Well, that was
right.
Reb Hillel Paritcher who said people used to think he was a tzaddik, and someone said, Halavai Beinani. But the point is, we're all potential Beinanis. We all can reach that level, and if not completely, momentarily, moments, you could have a Beinani moment.
Right, and that helps us just feel like it helps us with the conviction. I think it helps us feel like it gives us that self, this surety, that surety, like that. Or
what gives you the conviction? I don't understand what you said.
The fact that you're working on trying to be a Beinani, and that you can have Beinani moments helps you have conviction.
Yes, but the more and more you study, the point is you can't just hope to have Beinani moments without learning, without studying, without working on your intellect. A person, it's not going to happen automatically. If even a Beinani who's doing completely learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs, not doing one single avera, he's not considered to be serving Hashem if he's coasting along.
Right, like you said last class, we have to get to the 101.
Exactly.
Okay.
Panina wanted to say something.
We go back to the ending where you said your heart, and like right away said no, shut that down. I don't know, having a hard time with that.
Oh, I didn't say shut it. I didn't say shut it down.
No, okay, I heard there like, oh no, go to the intellect. I guess I'm hearing.
Okay, so let me clarify.
We need that heart. I mean,
yes.
Sometimes you choose because your heart tells you to do the right things. I mean, felt like too much of a blanket statement.
Okay, so
sometimes you feel like doing the right thing, like what I'm saying, like that's meaning your heart is.
First of all, okay, so let's clarify. Let's
your brain might be telling you not.
Yes, so let's clarify that. First of all, there are lots of reasons why your heart is telling you to do something. Your heart could be telling you to do something because that's your nature. You just like doing that. Your heart could be telling you to do something because you became inspired by something. Let's say you went to a class and you became inspired. So that's an emotional feeling. You became like emotions. Many times I've given a class and people have cried during the class. Well, that's emotion. Wow, they became inspired. And hopefully they'll leave the class and do a mitzvah as a result of that, right? Your heart has two sections. So your heart is the right side of the heart and the left side of your heart. We cannot make the blanket statement as well to always listen to your heart, because you have to determine where in your heart is it coming from?
That's different than saying your heart. You just
Wait,
used that. What originally there was a.
wait.
Sorry.
Yiddishkeit is moyach shalit alalev. I know it might be an uncomfortable thought to deal with, that it sounds nice, to listen to your heart, but not always is your heart leading you correctly. Now, sometimes, especially if you've developed yourself and you're learning Torah and you're cleaving to Hashem and you're becoming more in alignment with what Hashem wants, sometimes your heart leads you directly. But we have a concept. One of the sheish mitzvahs tamidiyos, one of the 6 constant mitzvahs, is v'loi sosuru acharei lavavchem. Do not follow your heart.
So meaning, filter it through your brain.
Exactly. So you could follow your heart.
Follow your heart, but filter through your brain.
Exactly. So you could
moment.
follow your heart. Sometimes
Okay.
let's say sometimes someone asks you I'll give you a very simple practical example. Let's say someone asks you to do something and you really feel like saying no, but you say yes. You really don't want to, you're not feeling it. You say, okay, I'll do it. But in the meantime, you're, because you're not in alignment with what you're doing, right? You're not in alignment. You're saying, yes, I'll do something, but really your heart is not in alignment, right? For whatever reason, it's from the animal soul, the godly soul. So sometimes if you reflect upon that, like let's say I've committed myself, I've learned from experience. People say, oh, can you give a class and whatever? Oh, could you do this? Could you do that? And I say, yeah, okay, because it sounds nice, And then I was like, oh gosh, what was I thinking? I have so many things to do and whatever. So that icky feeling actually comes from my godly soul, because I shouldn't be committing myself to one more thing and neglecting my kids and right? So it's not simply to say, listen to your heart, because your heart doesn't always lead you correctly. You have to define where that feeling in your heart is coming from.
Okay, that's different.
I think the confusion also comes from nowadays, psychology and what everyone's all into is listening to your body, listening to your heart. So it's where does that stand? I think it's you must bring it back to your mayach all the time.
Right, but I will give a caveat, and we're having a nice upbringing over here. As we are still in Golus and Mashiach didn't come yet, things are not always clear. So it's very easy to say, oh, determine where in your heart it's coming from. Is it coming from the godly soul? Is it coming from the animal soul? Well, guess what? Sometimes it's not clear where it's coming from. You're not sure if it's a good thing or not. You're not sure. And the reason for that is because since the sin of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, we live in a situation in this world called ta'aruvos toivara. Good and bad are mixed up. That's why there are gray areas and we're not sure. But we have a solution for that as well. And the Rebbe has spoken many times about the solution. If you are not sure what to do in areas of Avodas Hashem, then you have to speak to a mashpia. And the reason why is very, very logical. It's a very logical situation, a very logical answer. You're not sure what your heart is telling you to do is coming from the Yetzer Tov or the Yetzer Hara or the Nefesh Elokis or the Nefesh Abamis, right? So what do? You go speak to a mashpia. And the concept of mashpia actually, I think, comes even from the times of the Mittel Rebbe. The Mittel Rebbe explained it, that what happens like this. You yourself have a godly soul and an animal soul. Now, your animal soul is selfish, right? In fact, your animal soul wants your pleasure, but your animal soul really couldn't care about anyone else. Your animal soul is selfish. Your godly soul, however, is altruistic. Your godly soul wants Hashem's good. And Hashem's good means caring about others as well, right? So when a person, the Rebbe explains, when a person speaks to a mashpia, you are engaging the mashpia's nefesh elikis. You are engaging the mashpia's godly soul. So you are a person who has a godly soul and an animal soul. Your mashpia has a godly soul and an animal soul, except that your mashpia's animal soul couldn't care less about you. Your mashpia's animal soul cares about him, not about you. But your mashpia's godly soul cares about you and him as well. So therefore, it's stronger. You have 2 godly souls against 1 animal soul. And that's why we are given this tool that if things are not clear and you're not sure what the right thing is to do, and you're not sure where it's coming from, is it coming from the godly soul and animal soul, then speaking to a mashpia is a solution. Any more comments before we close off the Farbrengen for the day? Anyone want to give some takeaways? Sometimes at the end of my coaching sessions, I coach people. I say, what's your takeaway? One word encapsulates everything.
I would have to say to not be hard on myself and just keep struggling to listen to my godly soul and not worry. As a Baal Tshuva, it was very hard in the beginning, 20 some odd years ago, that all of a sudden when I realized there was such a thing as God and I had this godly soul, I felt like I was behind the ball. I'm like, I'm never going to catch up. I'm never going to be able, how do I do all of this? I don't know what to do first. I'm like, I was going crazy till I spoke to my mashpia and wait, one thing at a time, just, keep moving forward, because it was had such anxiety about all the things I wasn't doing and the things that I just couldn't simply just take on, like you don't jump, I didn't want to jump off the cliff, but I wanted to jump off the cliff. Or I wanted to jump into the
because we'll learn later in Tanya also that when the Yetzer Hara sees that you're really strongly have a conviction about something,
right.
He's going to double his efforts, right?
Oh yeah,
he's going to double his efforts, which also shows you that it's a good thing. You're on a good path, right?
Right.
The more obstacles you have shows you. But the bottom line is, yes, what we learn from this chapter is just keep going, keep struggling, pick yourself up and keep going. Yes, and Hashem helps. That's the point. Hashem helps you.
Right. Now that's what we learned today. That's my takeaway. I learned that Hashem's in that struggle with me.
Exactly.
I'm struggling and Hashem's listening and he's recognizing that I'm in the struggle and he's going to help me.
Exactly.
Kivuna.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies, have a great week. Mirz Hashem, we will see each other next week. Easy preps.
Thank you.
We have lots of challenges. This week we have lots of challenges. I feel like the weeks preceding Pesach are when our animal soul and Yetzer Hara really try having parties. So it's good to really try and have some Benoni moments, even if it's a few.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.